All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Today we are starting A Crown of Swords. I actually have a cover this time, and it's one of the few good covers. Although Rand, I know he's supposed to be buff, but man, he looks jacked.
Yeah, you just the way he's described. Yeah, he should be ripped, but taller and skinnier ripped.
Yeah, yeah. Um, at least, at least the cover actually reflects something in the book, and actually looks like, you know, he looks a little too old and maybe a little too jacked arms, but yeah, it looks like how Rand is described more or less. That looks like it could be, you know, a scary city that maybe I shouldn't name because we're not in spoilers. I just realized. So at least it actually looks, familiar. It looks like whoever was the artist has actually read the books.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas most of the time, you're not sure that anyone has ever read these.
Well, now that you say that out loud, though, I do find it funny that the cover is a spoiler.
Yeah, which shouldn't be hard to figure out, even if this is your first read.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this is, I don't know if I've ever done this before, but I'm actually starting before the prologue because the the blurb at the very beginning, the prophecy, is interesting. Um, in part because from a much disputed translation of the prophecies of the dragon by the poet Kiera Termendal of Shiota, believed to have been published between 700 and 800. Um, if I recall correctly, the calendar system, FY, it starts at the foundation of uh, the White Tower, because that's kind of the official end of the breaking. And so, and because the breaking, I don't know if you get it somewhere, I believe it is either said or implied, maybe it's just in the big white book, that the breaking was, I believe, 200 years long, is how long the
Mm.
breaking lasted. And then the White Tower was founded, and then I believe it was 1,000 years after that that the Trolloc War started, and then 1,000 years after that that Hawkwing. So those were the two major continent-wide events the uh, after the breaking.
Mm-hmm.
Their millennial, which uh, I'm not sure if he did that on. I mean, you always think he did it on purpose, but I'm not sure if it was specifically inspired by his theology, because there are um, there is a strain of theology that deals heavily with millennialism, and that those 1,000 years are important. But then there's also a lot of secular stuff that holds those kind of big numbers as important.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, and
the
even advertisers know it. If you uh, promote things on certain times of the year, like the first of the year, if you're in the health industry, or
Mhm.
things along those lines, that people actually have a larger tendency to go along. There was a nice little study with prisoner or criminals, where a law enforcement institute was doing like an amnesty program,
Mhm.
and they did it randomly at first, and they weren't getting anything out of it. They started doing it with known criminals on their birthday,
Hmm.
and they got three times the result. So it was these landmark days, if you can time them right. And what's more landmark than a 1,000 years of this? Something we can almost hardly fathom looking back, because we
Mhm.
barely live 100 if you're a centennial.
All right, so the prophecy itself too is Uh, it's strongly hinting at, because I mentioned yesterday that Lord of Chaos, the Dumais Well is kind of the, you know, season finale cliffhanger. It's the midpoint of the series, kind of, right? And you can kind of see where things are going, but then the prophecy also kind of reminds you of what's been happening with what it is predicting, basically. Um, and this comes from uh this comes from Arthurian legend, and I'm sure it's elsewhere too, but it's very prominent in Arthurian legend. If you remember the movie Excalibur,
Mm-hmm.
at the end, where he's withdrawn because he's had the falling out with Guinevere and Lancelot, and he's kind of sickly, and the land is sick. And then as he is, stirs himself back to action and goes riding off to meet the threat, the king is healthy once more, and the land is literally becoming green and blossoming as he rides by. Um, and it's strongly connected with that. And this may be the first hint we get of that. I can't remember if there are any other uh, foretellings or prophecies or visions or anything else that alludes to it. But there can be no health in us, nor any good thing grow, for the land is one with the dragon reborn, and he one with the land. Soul of fire, heart of stone. In pride he conquers, forcing the proud to yield. He calls upon the mountains to kneel and the seas to give way, and the very skies to bow. Pray that the heart of stone remembers tears and the soul of fire love. Um, I don't feel like that's very spoilery to mention that, because you see that's what's been going on, and we kind of talked about it in Lord of Chaos when Min shows up. That's why she's so important to Rand and his story, because he, Avienda and Elaine, they serve their purpose, but they kind of serve their purpose to help him as the Dragon Reborn and the Kara Karn. Min is his humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Which to go back to our last podcast, Min is the only real girl of the three. Her attraction to him is based on the things girls are attracted to. Where
mhm.
Elaine and Avienda, I mean, it's almost like just arranged marriages at that point with by fate.
Mhm. Um,
No, to piggyback on that, actually, to take a go in reverse to piggyback on that, I'm put in the description of the last the end of Lord of Chaos. I love how these books excuse me, I love how in these books there's a notion of fated insanity with Rand in the power, especially with Rand, but at the same time he's constantly exposed to trauma that would drive anyone insane without any metaphysical mechanism. You know, you
yeah.
look at it and like everybody's going, "Are you going insane, Rand?" And I'm like, I just want to be like, have you seen what has happened to this guy in the last year of his life?
Especially the last, handful of chapters of Lord of Chaos, he is literally tortured.
Mm-hmm.
He
Well,
is
and put in a dark,
physically,
isolated and then tortured, and isolated and tortured. You want to drive someone insane, put them in a dark box. I mean, that's
yeah.
the
So
recipe for it.
you're doubling up. Is that is physical torture, because it is so painful to be forced, crunched up. That's going to do nasty things to your muscles to be forced into that position, and then you have the dark enclosed space. So now you're adding some mental torture on top of it, and then uh extra physical torture just for fun when you let him out of the box.
And torture of someone he loves in front of him. You just keep piling on. Probably lack of sleep, probably malnourished, probably everything that you could do to break somebody. And the fact
Mhm.
that he's just not completely insane is, I mean,
Yeah.
and then you add to that, there's a voice in his head, a real one. We would have voices in our head just being in the box as normal people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, and it's not an accident that we're going to see how that affects Rand going forward, and we get this ominous prelude in this prophecy, because you should know, even if it's your first time reading forward, Rand has been through the ringer, and he's already starting to lose who he was. He is no longer the kind shepherd boy from the first couple of books. He is hardening big time. Um, Again, that's why Min was so important, and that's why the scene with Min and Perrin together was so important. Of, reminding them both, hey, Dingleberries, and she's about to do it again here. Hey, Dingleberries, you're supposed to be friends. Act like it.
Mm-hmm.
Remember who you are. Uh, I think it's also not a coincidence then that is his prelude to the prologue, which starts with Elaida. Elaida.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you pronounce it.
I think it's Elaida. I
It,
together, allied.
so I I like that when we get this scene to reinforce what a queen bee she is, that he already let the reader know how arrogantly wrong Elaida has been for the last 20 years. So when you read from her point of view, her thinking about her foretelling that the royal house of Andor was the key to the last battle, we know what that means. We know what that actually means. Not that Elaine isn't also important, but the key to the last battle is the Dragon Reborn. She should kind of understand that, but she's blinded in her arrogance, in her redness, of how hardcore of a red she is.
I'm going to push back on that. How would she understand that? Because she doesn't know the connection between him and Tigraine.
I mean, like 20 years ago when she had the foretelling, and undoubtedly there should have been a moment of thinking of what does this actually mean. And
Well, you can. This doesn't even take a willful blindness because she's invested in the House of Andor, and if she doesn't know the Tigraine connection, then
well, no, but
Rand.
she became invested after the foretelling. It was because of the foretelling that she became invested. Where was it? It's when Alviarin comes in here.
This is a snowball, though. She became invested after the foretelling, but she became invested in the house. And if you don't know the Tigraine connection, then you believe he was completely Aiel.
Yep, that's well. You shouldn't though. You should be able to piece it together with the prophecy
But
of
nobody even knew where Tigraine went.
born of the old blood, raised by the, or however it was, about being born of the blood but raised by someone else. There's a prophecy for that, and I can't remember the exact wording of it.
Yeah, but you know how much, like you pointed at this prophecy, the much debated.
Yep. The what it is exactly, the much disputed translation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and we got that at the very
and
beginning.
what was the old blood? You know, was it survivors of the Age of Legends? Was it this? Was it that? Technically, Andor is all new blood.
True, because it only came about after
After Hawkwing.
Hawkwing.
Yeah.
Where are you? All right, so here it is on page 10. Elaida had the foretelling sometimes, a talent many thought lost before her, and long ago she had foretold that the royal house of Andor held the key to winning the last battle. 25 years gone and more, as soon as it became clear that Morgase Strachan would gain the throne in succession, Elaida had fashioned herself to the girl as she was then. How Elaine was crucial, Elaida did not know, but foretelling never lied. Sometimes she almost hated the talent. She hated things she could not control. Ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
But
She must have
she
been born in the summer.
she is automatically assuming that it is Elaine. that this must be what that means. She
Well, and she's not 100% wrong because Elaine does, she wouldn't be a character in these books the way she is if she
Yeah,
wasn't a key cog in the whole thing.
true, but Gawain is also important. He's a prince. He's a potential general. He
Galad,
is a leader. Galad, also with uh tied to House Traken. Morghese herself. Um, but
well, I think this is the bias towards the fact that they're always queens, basically. That she had to, she came to that shallow conclusion that is going to be the queen of Andor at the time.
well, but this is what I was getting at though with the um connecting her to that prophecy of the dragon translation and what happened to Rand, connecting it to Elaida is because so much of the awfulness that is to come can be pinned pretty squarely on her
Mm-hmm.
because she is the one who instigated this, and it is in large part because um of her misandry, her anti-male bias from being a red. So as part of that, she cannot contemplate the possibility that that foretelling is anything but Elaine because she's a female, she's a princess, she's the future queen of Andor, and that undoubtedly was only reinforced when it became clear that Elaine had the spark. And then
Mm-hmm.
not only had the spark, but then became clear she has incredible potential in terms of power.
The thing I'll give you on this discussion is what she also should have, and everybody should have known with regards to this prophecy, is we have to include the dragon himself in this prophecy because without him the last battle can't happen and it can't be won. And so yes, she could have still lashed herself to Elaine as the key or whatever, but she never put into that model where the dragon fits in. Because looking at her plan just here recently that ended at Dumais Wells was to lock him away until it happened. That has nothing to do with Elaine. I mean, where's the buildup? What's the plan? We don't have a plan that has her as the key, even though you think she's the key.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the flaw in the model is she never included the most important thing in the whole equation. It's like solving for x, but x isn't even on the equation.
Yeah, and then she's kind of compounding it by so on page 15 when Alviar informs her that they have raised an Amarillan and that it is Egwene, and she finds that hilarious because the only possible reason they did that is to make her a scapegoat if things go wrong. She can't see that, and she should be able to. Well, no, not really, because she is not a manipulator. She is an authoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
So she does it. She immediately sees uh, a scapegoat because her first instinct isn't they chose someone malleable so that they could run things behind the scenes because she is not a behind the scenes person. That is not who she is or has ever wanted to be. Um, I do find it interesting though that clearly I really doubt Egwene would have known this. She might find it out now that she's being taught these things. But I doubt they told her that before they said, we're going to raise you Amarillion. Oh, and by the way, uh, as Elaida and Alviren point out, the only thing they've done, the rebels have done that demands stilling is claimed to be Amarillion. Um, now where is her foretelling? That is on page 18, I think. Yeah, here it is, the bottom of page 18. The White Tower will be whole again, except for remnants cast out and scorned, whole and stronger than ever. Randolph Thor will face the Emerald Seat and know her anger. The Black Tower will be rent in blood and fire, and sisters will walk its grounds. This I foretell. And of course, she immediately interprets that to her greatest benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And even Alviarin is kind of caught up in it, and she's Little Miss Super White. Oh, it's gonna get us canceled. She's Little Miss Superlogical. You know, she's the chief Vulcan here, and even she gets caught up in it. Uh, it's not until chapter
So by
1 or
being
2.
super logical, is she enacting whiteness?
Yes.
Per the lore.
How dare you think 2 + 2 = 4, Alviarin? Um, so when it switches to her point of view in a little bit, the her mysterious mistress is the one who has to kind of break the spell, so to speak, because Alviarin gets caught up in it, and then her mysterious mistress, whoever this Forsaken is, she has a much better understanding of what foretelling is, because it's not, as Elaida is thinking, it was thought that the before Elaida came along, it was thought that the talent was completely gone because it had been so long since anyone had it, and even it references earlier in the series Jitara Morosa,
Mm-hmm.
who foretold that he was born, and it was very rare that she would have a foretelling. So it takes someone who is not emotionally attached to this, because there's familiarity there, to say, hold on, what exactly did she say? You know, let's think this through. There are many ways this could be interpreted. So the next section of the prologue is Dumais Well from the Aiel point of view, and I forgot. I don't know how we skipped over this, but this was a big deal when it happened. When the Tower Aes Sedai met with the Wise Ones, and then the Wise Ones killed one of their own with the power to whip the Shido up into a frenzy to attack the Aes Sedai.
Mm.
And that was something I had been alluding to when I was talking about how uh, how the strict black and white nature of Aiel society means that when the switch gets flipped, it gets flipped hard. The pendulum doesn't, slowly swing back like a grandfather clock. No, it comes flying back hard and swings a long way over. So they have been taking baby steps for like the last several months in abandoning Giotto, and now they've just jumped off the cliff of killing a wise one, big effing deal, using the power to do it, lying about it, and using that to attack people that they're supposed to kind of hold in reverence, the Aes Sedai.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big effing deal, and I do like the um kind of the thought process here from Savannah, from her point of view, of how some of the others who were in on it kind of sneer at her and look at her sideways when she's exhorting the Shido to battle because of, was it Desane or whoever it was that they'd killed, and she's even exhorting the wise ones, and they're looking at her like, we know what happened. Stop trying to hold this over our heads. We know what happened. We know what really happened. you conniving little. Um, and then so as the battle progresses, then when when she's told that there are other Aiel there and they have wise ones with them, and there's the initial shock of they have wise ones channeling, they have wise ones participating in battle, and what did you just do? But they do eventually find a line, which is they will not attack other wise ones. Certainly not openly. They will not attack other wise ones. Who would you cast as Savannah in her enormous bosom? Big, blonde, bosomy goodness.
I don't know what her acting skills are, but Kate Upton comes to mind.
Someone with a physique like that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a tough one.
All right.
Dang it, now I'm thinking.
I've distracted us with bosoms. Um Oh, well, while you're thinking, I'll mention this because you had gotten confused as to who this was and when this was, and we get a little hint of it here that I won't go into because spoilerness.
Let me put it in spoiler section
So
too then.
page 34, then she tossed down the spear and felt her belt pouch where a small cube of intricately carved stone lay. Well that she had hesitated over throwing that away. She had another cord for her bow yet. Gathering her skirts to bare her legs, she joined in the chaotic flight. But if all the rest fled in terror, she ran with plans whirling through her head. She would have Randall Thor on his knees before her, and the Aes Sedai as well. Um, I'm gonna rule 30 for us. Wait, or is that the wait? Which is which? No, Godwin's law. Rule 34 is if it exists, there is porn of it on the internet somewhere. It's totally different. But the Shido and Savannah's mentality in their continued opposition to Rand reminds me in a lot of ways, and other people of scholarly note have written ad nauseum about this, and it is a disturbing psychological evaluation of uh the Nazi hierarchy and the German people's uh, stubborn refusal to surrender long after it became clear that there was no way they could win this war. Um, you look at the Battle of the Bulge, and oh, I'm blanking on his name. There's a German historian who's written on this, and he's in some documentaries on Netflix. I can't remember the titles. There's a couple of uh World War II documentaries on Netflix, and he talks about the Battle of the Bulge and how it was a fantasy from the very beginning. There was no way was going to work. There was not only not work, but there was no way this was going to end in anything but a disaster. And yet, not only did Hitler conceive this mad plan, but everyone went along with it because you're so tunnel visioned, you won't let yourself entertain alternatives because you have so dedicated yourself to whatever insane plan you had that
Well, we just
no,
talked
I'm going to
about
make
this
this
with
work.
Elaida. She drew a conclusion off an initial impression, and for 20 years she's been pushing the square peg through the round hole.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's hard to think that anything he does is on accident, but I do find it interesting that right after the Elaida section of the prologue, we've got the Savannah section from their own points of view, and it is somewhat amusing how alike they are. And then we get Alviarin's point of view, which we kind of already talked about. Uh, had Had we had any hints before this that she was black? Or because I can't remember the first time I read this. I can't remember if this came out of the blue at me or not.
I remember it being pretty obvious and not a surprise when this came around, but I don't think there was any overt hints that she was.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can think
I'll have to
of.
remember because when she was manipulating Elaida into making the move to begin with, there might have been something that slipped through there, but other than that,
Yeah, the only thing I can remember that might have been a clue is the letter she sent to Rand. And because Rand asks Moiraine,
well, and she openly lied in it. Yeah.
and Rand, that was a point that a pointed question. Rand asked Moiraine. I assume an Aes Sedai can't lie in writing any more than they can in speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and Moiraine confirmed that. Okay, well, but what if she's not bound by that oath?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but this is um I've mentioned this a couple of times when we talk about Lord of Chaos, is that because of all the things that are happening there, and especially how it ends with the Dark One laughing maniacally as Demandred says, have I not done well about sowing chaos? And Lord of Chaos gets you glancing sideways at everyone. There were big lists and forums dedicated to, okay, who do we know for sure is not a dark friend? Who do we know for sure is? And here's the giant list of who could be.
Yeah, and it was always like is not because point of view blah 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 blah,
Yeah.
and is not point of view blah 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 blah. And realistically, everybody that we didn't have a point of view from was on the maybe list or the absolute list.
And then here, all of a sudden, he just drops her Forsaken right in front of you and says, "Ta-da!" So I feel like this was pretty shocking when it happened. Um, oh, and we do know who I was saying her mistress, and it does name her.
Yeah,
So it is, yeah, we do know that it is
Masana.
Masana. Okay. Um, and then we get poor Pedron Niall getting murdered, and then his murderer getting Jack Ruby'd. Well, no, not Jack Ruby, because Jack Ruby was the one who did it. Uh, Oswalded. Any thoughts on this?
No, it's other than this is the pivotal moment that Morghese becomes completely uninteresting because the last interesting moments
Mhm.
we have are her bantering with Pedro Niall.
It is. I recall it being a an exciting, fun, likable scene when it happened, and now just looking forward, it's tedious knowing what's to come. So it's not as fun because that banter as they're kind of playing the game of houses against each other, and I know that you know that I know that you know that you know. So you've got that element to it as they kind of jockey for position verbally, but then also kind of the last bit you get from Niall as he's dying about how he would have laughed if he could, but his lungs filling up with blood kind of makes that hard, because he can see immediately what is happening,
Mm-hmm.
and then the dummy who stabbed him cannot. So he sees it immediately, and then Balwer comes in, and uh, and we know that he knows because we know who he really is.
Mm-hmm.
But Asanawa and Valda just immediately dismiss him because he's just a squirrely little secretary. He's just Rick Moranis, and we're just going to ignore him. But we know that he knows, and we know why his eyes are looking not down on his dead master, but on that strip of paper that he really wants to know what is on there. Uh, and we know from Niall's reactions, it was something very important that is now going to blindside Valda and Asanawa because they are not interested in anything else except the children and their position and power there. Crap, I forget. That's what's next. Son of a biscuit. And then the last scene in the prologue is Gawain. And this is where he starts to become a gigantic, tedious moron. Or is it just me? That I understood, and I think we talked about this a fair bit when it happened, is I understood his mentality and his point of view in Lord of Chaos. Here is where he becomes just a fool, just an utter fool. And it's hard to find redeeming qualities in him because it's becoming harder and harder to understand where he's coming from.
This is exactly when he starts to be this.
No, it's everyone else I've ever trusted who are wrong. Exactly. Because where is it? There's one particular thing. He wished he could have killed Althor. This is on page 51 for his mother, dead by the man's doing. Egwene denied it, but she had no proof. What what's your proof that he did it? What proof do you have, you idiot?
Mm-hmm.
And the absurdity of, all right, you trust your sister. Your sister is very important to you. So add on top of the fact that the woman you love assures you that he did not do this thing and you refuse to believe it. Add on top of that, your sister, whom you have great respect for, also loves this man and you refuse to believe it.
Well, and even still, he adds the extra thought of, and if they're both right, even more reason to kill him.
And the thought that he didn't not kill him because he's the Dragon Reborn, and if I kill him, the world is doomed. No, he would have done it still. It's only because of the promise he made to Egwene that he doesn't doom the entire world. Mega, there's a spoiler thought I have here that
Okay, well, give me keywords
about
that'll remind you.
about Gawain and Rand.
Gawain and Rand. Okay.
At least we get a nice action scene here, and I've said before, there are a lot of fantasy authors that I like, except when they try and write action, and it's really hard to follow. Jordan has a knack for making the action easy to follow, making it easy to visualize in your head what's going on. So at least we get a cool action scene, and we get, he's kind of told us before, and now he's showing us because we've just heard about what the younglings have done and who they are, and now we actually see, no, these kids are actually, have had to grow up before their time, and they've grown up hard, and so they're actually a legitimate fighting force. All right, and then huzzah, Perrin, who we lost for a whole book, and then we get back briefly at the beginning of Lord of Chaos, and then he was gone for almost the rest of the book. But
And
now
then
we
back
finally
at the
get him.
end. Yes.
Yeah. And so now we get some more.
Did I show the meme where they were going over, I did this, and this, and then it shows Perrin and he goes, there's a book 5?
I haven't seen that one.
While you're talking, I'll bring it up.
I'm not sure what all to get into with this because he packs a lot of stuff into this first chapter of and I like his style of point of view rather than the traditional third person narration, because Jordan is laying out the complex web of mess. As someone in one of these chapters puts it, this is, a wagon full of fireworks just waiting for a spark. And so we get this complex mess of, you know, the allies. They're not really friends, and there's a lot of tension there. And then you add on top of that the tension for their defeated between them and their defeated foes, and also how that the different factions within the allies have different views on their defeated foes, especially when it comes to the Aes Sedai. So you've got this big complicated mess, but then you have the added benefit of the way he explains the complicated mess to you, gives you more insight into Perrin and who he is. Oh,
Poor Perrin.
I only get to go cool it in off screen. There's a book called Fires of Heaven. Yeah. Poor Perrin indeed, especially from this point of view. Irritably scratching his short curly beard. The more he sweats, the more it itches, but he can't shave it because his lady likes it.
Oh, you have a similar story. Why couldn't you do the Magnum PI
Oh
stash?
yeah, I forgot to mention that yesterday. So I had on the Hawaiian shirt, the Detroit Tigers hat, which I originally got because a place I was working that they wanted us all to dress up for Halloween. Fine, and I thought, you know what? I've already got everything I need except the Detroit Tigers hat to pull off Magnum PI, so I'll do that. And to the extent that I went ahead and I shaved everything but the mustache, and I was informed that I would receive no lovin', no canoodling, no nothing until the beard grew back in, because apparently the stash was awful.
Well, mine's not as exciting. I was told don't ever shave your beard by my niece because she said you look stupid without your beard.
Thanks.
So thanks.
But
See,
it's what guys do. Speaking of it's what guys do,
well, the beard
um,
is male makeup.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I I do like the interaction with Perrin and the naked blonde babe. Of
I'm forgetting this one.
so it's kind of on, where is it, 60? No. Yeah, so 60 and 61, he's thinking about and talking about Guy Shane and all that. And then so on 62, um Perrin did not need to look up to know it was the golden-haired Shido woman. He kept peering off at nothing in another direction. Aiel had a peculiar sense of humor, and Maidens of the Spear, Karahuan was a maiden, had the most peculiar. They had quickly seen how the Wetlanders reacted to the Shido. They would have needed to be blind not to, and suddenly Guy Shane were being sent to Wetlanders left and right, and Aiel all but rolling on the ground at the blushes and stammers and even the shouting. He was sure that Karahuan and her friends were watching now. This was at least the 10th time one of the Guy Shane women had been sent to ask him whether he wanted water or had a spare whetstone or some such bloody fool thing. Abruptly, a thought struck him. The miners were seldom bothered this way. A handful of Karhinen plainly enjoyed looking, if not so openly as the miners, and some of the older Two Rivers men who should have known better. The point was, none of them had a second spurious message that he knew of. Those who reacted the most, on the other hand, Karhinen, who shouted the loudest about indecency, and two or three of the younger Two Rivers men who stammered and blushed so hard they looked ready to melt, had been pestered until they fled the wagons entirely. With an effort, Perrin looked up at the Guy Shane's face, at her eyes. Focus on her eyes, he thought frantically. Yeah, as Ron White said, you've seen one pair of boobies, you want to see them all.
Yeah, a 90-year-old biker bitch comes up to you and she says, "You want to see my tits?" All
Okay,
right. Flop, flop.
roll them
All
back
right,
up.
you can roll them back up now.
Uh,
Copyright Ron White. There we go. cover our ass here.
Um, Had a Netflix special a few years ago that was really funny.
His last one though, it was almost like, I don't care about vulgar that much, but it was so vulgar that it even turned me off.
Yeah, yeah, that needs to be that. That's why I like Jimmy Carr. He's one of my favorites because he is incredibly vulgar, but he knows how to use it to punctuate, to catch you off guard with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just seemed to be the exception to the rule was a normal word.
All right.
And see, now I know the ways of the Aiel. I need to pretend like I'm blushing and not wanting to see this. Ha ha! I have learned their ways.
My innocent eyes are offended.
As my boner's ripping out of my pants.
Okay, now.
Excuse me, my small clothes.
Yes, let's remember what we're doing today.
Yeah.
My small clues. All right, chapter 2. Um, yeah, this man, he brings the fun of that scene down in a hurry with the beginning of chapter 2 here, as Perrin is thinking about
Well, I mean, it's titled
yep, the
The
butcher's
Butcher's
yard.
Yard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like the punctuation there of hammer stroke, and then looking at the graves, thinking about whose graves those are, hammer stroke, and more graves, hammer stroke. And so uh random rant, that is why Marvel has come to suck, because they took the quips and the laughs um of Whedon and what he did with the Avengers, and Gunn and what he did with Guardians of the Galaxy, and they said, "Oh, people like the laughs. Let's do it constantly." And you can
We have
never
an
have
earlier example of that. It's called Jar Jar Binks.
Yep, you can never have a serious moment. The point
Mm-hmm.
of comic relief in something serious is to, one, give you a break from the drama, but also set you up for another hit of drama to make the following drama even more impactful. So we had a little levity there, and now we have gut punches, repeated gut punches as he looks over. So not only from him, but then where is it? Yeah, okay, so it's 81 where you have the little flashback scene of Perrin going up to Rand the previous night, and because the Aes Sedai come up to him wanting to know what the heck Rand is doing down there amongst the sea of vultures and ravens, and and Perrin says, "I don't know," and he knows darn well because he saw it directly last night with Rand, and this is one of my favorite, in air quotes there, because it is poignant and powerful and pretty harsh of how Jordan uh describes the scene. I especially like the way he where is it? Whatever trick the Aes Sedai knew to keep the heat from touching them, Rand and the shaman knew too, but he was not using it now. The night's heat would have done for a more than warm summer day, and sweat slid down Rand's cheeks as much as Perrin. Uh, where is it? About his face all. Oh, here it is. Skipped it. Rand's face was drawn and twisted, the face of a man who wanted to scream or maybe weep, and was fighting it down with every scrap of his fiber. Um, and there's nothing really Perrin can do, so he does what there is to do, which is just sit by him and listen. Um, because Perrin fully understands this because they come from the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And he's had to deal with this too. It isn't specifically about women like it is with Rand, that's kind of his hang up, but it is with you know, as he's constantly thinking about his people, the Two Rivers people, aren't soldiers. They're not used to this. They shouldn't, in his mind, they shouldn't have to deal with this. There are 19 dead Two Rivers people who were never seen home again because they followed me. And he feels incredibly responsible for that because in his mind, these people shouldn't be in danger. They're farmers, they're, Fletchers, they're, shepherds. They should be back home doing their small town thing, and instead they're here. All right. Um, uh, I like the setup on page 83 with Karuna talking to Perrin, because she's going to get smacked down here at the end of the chapter. So I like her. Um, I like her haughtiness with
Mm-hmm.
Perrin, when he yells at her for changing the plan and getting half the miners killed. Um, and then you get a little break there when Loyal comes in, because he's always a bit of comic relief because of the way he acts. His whispers that can be heard 100 yards away, and his constant worry about angering Aes Sedai and Perrin being too hasty. So you get a little break of that, and then you get Rand walking up, and all the mess getting laid out in front of him. Um, any thoughts on all the back and forth here with Rand and all the different factions?
No, there's this. This is again, as you talk about, this is a lot of setup because of things
Mm-hmm.
we see later, uh, especially with the Aes Sedai. Cerelia is interesting here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we know from what was it, book 4, how damning the title of Dot saying
Mm-hmm.
is, and she throws that out, and she doesn't throw it out loosely.
Mm-hmm. Uh, I like the page 97. Javian and Dobrain come up to Perrin, concerned about uh Lord Perrin. It's the Lord Dragon. All that searching through the corpses, it seemed a little excessive. Dobrain interrupted smoothly. We worry for him, blah blah blah. Perrin was not steeped in the game of houses. He's still sane, he said bluntly. Yep. And then we get to the scene I alluded to earlier of Rand and Perrin together, and of course Min's there with Rand all the time. Uh, so she's there, and uh, he lays everything out that he was sniffing, but you know doesn't attribute it to sniffing. Um, so this is page 99. You think something else would be that much worse? Rand said quietly, and Perrin's skin prickled. He met Rand's gaze directly. 1,000 times, he said in just as quiet a voice, I won't be part of murder. If you will be, I'll stand in your way. A silence stretched, unblinking, blue-gray eyes meeting unblinking golden. Frowning at each of them in turn, Min made an exasperated sound in her throat. You two woolheads. Rand, you know you'll never give an order like that, or let anyone else give it, either. Perrin, you know he won't. Now the pair of you stop acting like two strange roosters in a pen. Which, if you've never seen two strange roosters in a pen, it's about like two cats being thrown in a room together, which was another analogy he used previously. Uh, but to
But the thing is, she was wrong. in saying, Rand, you know you'd never give that order. But saying that made him not give that order.
She was wrong in that she doesn't yet realize how much Rand has changed.
Mm-hmm.
The Rand that she knew in the previous books would not have done that. That's the whole point of why he needs her. Because right now, he might. Um, but
And I
she's
would almost postulate, though, that she knows she's lying because she was there for the transformation. She was part of the transformation. She should know her role in the transformation.
what's possible. Yeah. Um, and this is kind of her nature. She is kind of flippant and sarcastic, and she does use, you know, humor and bluster is part of her shtick. That's how she navigates the world socially. So it could be that, you know, the whole you two woolheads and the comparing them to roosters in a pen, you know, may be part of her, you know, that may be purposeful language to be disarming.
Well,
'Cause
and
she is pretty savvy.
in this exact scene, though, with from Perrin's perspective, Rand is arguing with himself in his head,
Mhm.
and it makes you wonder, if we got Rand's perspective there, would you have Luz Theron trying to kill the women
This is a distinct possibility.
and Tame and everybody else in the process?
You know what? That is actually no, that probably is true because I think we kind of glossed over this, but when Rand breaks out, he has to fight back Lews Therin because Lews Therin wants to find Galena and hurt her, punish
Mm-hmm.
her, because she was the primary torturer. And Rand has to fight him back and realize my people are in danger. My people have come here to, when he starts to look around and realize what's going on, my people have come here to rescue me. They are in danger. I need to help them. So he has to fight Lews Therin back. So that is probably what is going on in Rand's head. Um,
Which would make Perrin correct and incorrect at the same time, and Min correct and incorrect at the same time. Min is correct that Rand wouldn't do that, but Lews Therin is slightly starting to take control right now.
mhm,
And Perrin is correct that Rand's body would do that, but who's in charge? He
mhm,
doesn't know.
mhm.
Yeah.
Because even though he has kind of no way of knowing what's going on, he can tell that something is going on in Rand's head, and he
Well,
is
don't we get him talking to Lews Therin in front of Perrin in that little flashback the night?
yes, but
Yeah.
he knows he's having an argument with himself, but I don't think he has any way of knowing that that's Lews Therin, and that Lews Therin's voice is actually in his head.
Well,
His
again,
concern
like
is
I
just
said,
he's
both
going
of them were
crazy.
right without knowing how right they
Yeah.
were.
Um. So the only other thing I think I want to highlight is the bottom of page 101. Never mind the prisoners, Rand told her, talking to Min. That's what they'll stay. But Rand, I keep feeling there's something important. If I could only pick it out, you need to know. Um, but I think Rand doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want them to be important because he is now completely untrusting of Aes Sedai and also kind of wants to be adversarial, I think, because of what's been done to him. And I think that's one of the reasons he's pushing that thought away of just forget it. Just forget it. I want to be uh I want to be at war with, you know, he's basically he's convinced himself, and he's kind of used this language a few times, is that he he is at war with the White Tower. They are not his, they are his enemies, or at least if not enemies, adversaries. All right, let's pause for a second. All right, so we've been yakking for a little while, and so we're gonna go on to spoilers now. This always happens at the beginning of these books because there's so much going on in the first handful of chapters of every book that it takes us a while to get through, like, say, the first 10, 12 chapters, just because there's so much going on. And even more so in this one, because not only is he setting up a lot of things as he always does, but he's also resolving a lot of things that happened at in Lord of Chaos. So he's doing, double duty. That Elaida point of view was resolution of the Tower embassy and what they did to Rand, but then also setting up what's going to happen in the Tower down the road. So hopefully we'll get moving faster next time, but we're going to get on to spoilers now. So go away if you are reading this for the first time. Um,
My first
and
note was Elida's necessary awfulness.
necessary awfulness.
Because you talk about how much she causes, but going forward, you needed it to happen for things to work out the way if she wasn't awful, Egwene is a moot point.
Mm-hmm.
If she wasn't awful, Rand doesn't go down this path. If she wasn't awful, the countries would get behind the White Tower. All of these things.
Well, and it makes sense that she is awful, and yet she was chosen Amarillan because dun 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 spoiler, go away if you're still here. The Black wanted it that way
Mm-hmm.
because what was the last book? The Lord of Chaos. They wanted to sow chaos. They wanted to
Mm-hmm.
keep the nations from uniting. They wanted to keep the nations from backing Rand. They she's a known quantity. They,
Which
they
which
know
brings me
who
to
she
one of
is.
Scott's comments. So we can mix a comment with regular spoilers here. He said Rand is the Lord of Chaos.
Hmm.
No,
He's an agent of chaos,
and so is
uh,
Elaida. The Dark
frequently
One is
anyway.
the Lord of Chaos.
Uh-huh.
The Dark One is the Lord of Chaos, and he is doing all these things to sow chaos,
Mhm.
including driving Rand mad, including uh, propping Elaida up, including even in, since we're in spoilers, I can say this, even in Saladar getting Egwene as the new Amirlan seat, because Sheriam had a lot to do with that. Delena
Mhm.
had a lot to do with that. Halima, just the nature of Halima's being is chaos.
And then latching on to Egwene here
Yeah. Yeah,
in this book.
just the fact that she channels the male source while being a female is a sower of chaos.
Mm.
The freaking golem that we're going to see here a lot more is chaos in incarnate, really. Yeah, so I disagree with you, Scott. Rand is not the Lord of Chaos. The
Well,
Dark One is the Lord of Chaos.
although
Rand,
the
he's trying to make Rand the world embodiment of it.
letting him run loose is seen by the bad guys as a positive. I mostly agree with that part, though.
Well, yeah, but it's all the Dark One's plan.
Yes, he they want him to run loose, unable to accomplish the things he wants to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
So, continually sowing the seeds of distrust and doubt in him so that he is opposed, so that he has to come in with an iron fist, which only alienates people more. Um,
Which this is why I hate fate stories, because the Dark One wants to unravel the pattern and do all these things, and if he wins, then the pattern is gone, therefore fate is gone, and chaos rules. But the things he's doing in the name of chaos are all the things that were necessary for Rand to win in the end. So,
yeah, but it still works because
well, it works. It's just when you really break it down on that level, you're
the
like, the Dark One had no chance, even though we're supposed to think he had a chance.
well, no, I mean, the Dark One comes very close to winning, even though, I mean, yes, in the objective sense, we, the reader, knows it's going to be at least a happy-ish ending,
Well,
but
but he loses because of all the things he did to win. If Rand is still a country bumpkin by the end of this, the Dark One wins.
because Rand doesn't have the strength to fight him.
Yeah, Rand is a farm boy. Those are the alternate visions. Remember, Rand never becomes the Dragon Reborn in the alternate visions. The best thing for the Dark One to do to win was to make sure Rand never was discovered.
And after every vision, it was I have won again, lose there.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's the scorpion and the frog. The Dark One can't help itself. That's its nature. So that's its nature. And then the useful idiots. So Ishamael is not a useful idiot. He's the
I was gonna
one
say
who
he's the
really
one that
isn't.
should understand what I'm saying better than anybody else.
But he so desperately wants the Dark One to win because he so desperately wants nothingness.
But that's what I'm saying. The best way for the Dark One to win is Rand never gets discovered.
Probably. And yet Ishamael is the one is Balsamon. He's the one driving everything to try and co-opt the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
So Savannah and the Cube. You brought that up as a spoiler.
Yes. So that is what is going that's what she's going to use to he's setting up what's going to happen later. And I'm 99% sure that I'm correct that it's Samael and Grendel who are helping the Shido, but are actually just, doing their own schemes. So he's giving us that little nugget to set up for what's going to happen here in a little bit when we get back to the Shido. I think that's all I had on that.
Gawain and Rand.
Okay, so this is where the resolution of Gawain's story is so frustrating because the ultimate conclusion Gawain kind of comes to should be something that is damning, because ultimately at the end he comes to the conclusion, and I can't remember who kind of helps him see this, that his problem with Rand isn't really that he thinks Rand killed his mother. He wants Rand to have killed his mother because he wants a reason to oppose Rand because he's jealous. His life was supposed to be grand and he was supposed to be important. And ultimately he wasn't. Ultimately he was a bit player in a sideshow. Off Broadway. While the main stage was being conducted by people he thought unworthy. And annoyingly, that doesn't have the impact. That to me, that's the biggest problem I have with Gawain's storyline is it's not that he's such an idiot. As we said here, from his point of view, he is an utter fool from his point of view. And it's just obviously so, painfully obvious. And it takes so long for someone to point it out to him to get him to have some self-reflection. But then when he finally does have a little self-reflection, he doesn't let that go because he realizes he was wrong. He lets it go because he decides, I don't care about Rand. You're just a duty head. You don't matter to me anymore. No. The point here is you were an idiot and you were wrong, and you need to recognize that. And I think that's one of the reasons he is not satisfying through the last part of the series, because he never has that moment all the way till the very end, till his death.
And to me, what's not satisfying is his reconciliation moments. Realistically, the events around them should have pushed him in the other direction. Like the one right here, Dumais Wells and the events leading up to it. All he witnessed was Rand being tortured and an innocent girl he actually knew being tortured in the process.
Mm-hmm.
but yet he still went further in the direction of I hate Rand,
And
not the Aes Sedai I protected in the tower.
we kind of skipped over this part, but part of that point of view was he was already beginning to suspect that the Aes Sedai, or at least some of them, were trying to make sure he never made it back. That he didn't make it
Mm-hmm.
out alive. He
Yeah.
didn't know why, but he was strongly suspect. And this is someone who's not a dummy. Again, he was raised by Morgase Dragon, one of the most competent rulers in the continent, and Gareth Bryne, one of the top 5 great generals on the continent. He can figure this stuff out.
Well,
And
the first time you
yet,
meet him, you get an impression that he can figure this stuff out.
even with all of that, he's still he's still on the same course. He stays on the same course. Knowing or strongly suspecting that the Aes Sedai are trying to kill him.
Yeah, well, not only stays on the same course, but he puts a brick on the accelerator and disconnects the brakes. He, he, he shows a lack of critical thinking skills from here on out, is what I'll say.
Also, maybe Scott can remember where this is, but someone's point of view, and I think it was in Lord of Chaos, thinks about not getting rid of Gawain. And I'm pretty sure that order came from Elaida. So just reinforcing what a moronic tool she is, that the key to winning the last battle is uh the Royal House of Andor, and you're going to kill a royal without knowing for sure whether it's him. Because she cannot contemplate even the possibility that it would be a man.
Even if you think abstractly and you're convinced it's Elaine and he's supposed to be the sword of Elaine, you kill him, you could indirectly kill Elaine.
You weaken Elaine. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Was that it for spoilers? And now just onto the comments.
Yeah. Those are the 3 notes I made. What's the first one?
Well, he likes our take on men and the interaction with the Aes
Mhm.
Sedai. Thank you. I'm glad we're useful to some degree. By this point in the series, I am completely disgusted by the Aes Sedai, whereas when we had Moraine, she mitigated my dislike of them. I kind of think that's the point, because I think RJ wants you to be disgusted with the Aes Sedai by this point because he wants to make Egwene more sympathetic. We're supposed to like her going forward, and we're about to meet Cadsuane, who we're also supposed to, I think, like. That
Mhm.
those two are supposed to kind of replace Moraine.
Well, but you also get other individuals like Myril who you kind of start to like.
Mm-hmm.
Uh we
Juan, as she changes due to her change in circumstances, you kind of start to like her as well.
Well, and since we're in spoilers, I can say this. And Varen, even though you find out what she was, you still like her compared to other
All the
Aes
way
Sedai.
through, and then
Yeah.
even more at the end, because
And even
it's
Alana, as horrible of a decision as she made, you kind of start feeling for her at points.
well, you have that moment here when we kind of skipped over it, but when Alana heals Rand and she whispers, like almost reflexively, I get the feeling like she couldn't help herself, but she whispers, "How do you live with the pain?" And he just ignores her. But she is, because of that connection, she's finally starting to understand who Rand is, not what he is.
And I think we have to start separating at this point in the book Aes Sedai as a society and Aes Sedai as the individuals, because even Karuna and Bera and all of them, we start to get the fleshed out version of them, and it's different than the White Tower. So we have to start separating the Aes Sedai from the White Tower
Mm-hmm.
as people, and as we got in the beginning, because we didn't even know a whole lot about the White Tower when you read the first book and you get to know Moraine.
Well, I do think that is an interesting point, because there is this interesting dynamic that's going on where um, the White Tower itself, that third or so of the Aes Sedai that stayed in the White Tower, that stayed loyal to Elaida.
Well,
They be
I would lump the Saladar status quo Aes Sedai as well into that.
there are some in that camp
Yeah.
that don't want that want things to go on as they always have, but because they are separated from the White Tower, they do start to change. Maybe not as much as Scott or others would have liked, but they do start to change. Whereas the White Tower Aes Sedai start to become even more Aes Sedai, because they become even more insular, and even more arrogant, as a counter
Yeah, because
reaction
not
to
only
the
are we the
split.
best in the world, but we're the best even opposed to the ones
We,
that left.
we are the
And
real Aes Sedai.
we're the real
Um,
ones. We're the
this is
OG.
this will get us canceled, but Jason Whitlock has noted several times that it's always the half Cs that are the most radical when it comes to CRT type stuff. Like he has pointed Kaepernick is an example, but then there are other examples where the more radical racialists seem to be only half black because they are trying to overcompensate to reinforce their identity. And I think that's what you have here with the tower, reinforcing, no, we are the real Aes Sedai, and we're going to prove it by being even more obnoxiously Aes Sedai than we already were. But then there is that third group that's non-aligned, kind of Cadsuan's group. They also start to become very different. And to your point, they start to become more individualistic.
Well, but even within the tower, we look at when Tarna makes it back and she starts having thoughts outside of the status quo. So
Because she's been
somewhat,
gone for so long, yeah.
yeah, well, but someone we're supposed to kind of hate when we see her in Saladar.
Mm-hmm.
But then she comes in later and she's like, I've been thinking about some things.
Mm-hmm.
It's and she's the one that proposed bonding the Asha Aman. So it's I think at this point in the book, this is where we branch out from White Tower politics to individual Aes Sedai and who's doing what where.
All right, so next comment, I can't believe I didn't think about this when we were just talking about Galwin, but Scott points out I just can't believe that he changed his opinion on about Elaida from the Eye of the World to this. See, that makes it worse to me because I don't think he has changed his opinion. I think he still thinks, she is who she was, which he didn't like her. I mean, he kind of respected her because of her position, but he clearly didn't like her. Um, and didn't trust her. And you add to that his thinking that he's strongly suspecting that the Aes Sedai were trying to get rid of him for some reason, and yet he's still following her. Not just the White Tower that he suspects was trying to get rid of him, but this particular individual who he already didn't like and didn't think was a good person. I mean, that just doubles down on the dumb.
I'm trying to think of what this is specific to in the comment because it says not never seen. So one of us said something about something being never seen. Rand destroyed the Trolloc horde in the Eye of the World. Granted, it is mostly off screen, but the illusion is there. Okay, so we know the scene because
I
that's the
can't.
very end when
I'll
they're
have to go back
basically
and watch
losing.
that. Yeah, I don't know. I
It,
don't know
it,
what that was referring to.
yeah. So I don't know the exact comment that was.
Oh, I think because I had commented on how this kind of use of the power
Oh.
was a shock to even battle hardened people. Um, and that is, Scott's point is valid, but from what we get of that scene where Rand kind of in a trance, not really knowing what he's doing, shows up at Tarwin's Gap
Mhm.
and blasts the Trolloc horde. But we get from who's the Shienarn dude? Agomar.
Agomar?
We get
Yeah.
from his perspective that it's a little hazy to the Shi'Narans what happened there. Some of them think the creator made flesh saved them. He saw what he thought was a man doing something that that a man should not do. So it's still a little hazy, and so Agomar might be one who has seen this kind of use of the power. Um, but even then, if, as I recall, Rand is basically making earthquakes and dropping lightning bolts out of the sky. Um, this is a whole nother level of gruesome.
Yeah, it's the difference between shooting someone in the head and throwing them in a meat grinder. Yeah, they both get the job done, but one looks a lot worse.
Well, that is um, it's long been established by military psychologists that that is what you do in a psyop is you try to frighten and demoralize the enemy, and it's not death that they're most afraid of. It's disfigurement.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got my list of ways I want to go or don't want to go.
Hmm.
You know, the dying is one thing. We all fear death to some degree or another.
Right.
But if it's going to happen, you know, I don't want it to be burning alive or mauled by wild animal. Those are my top two because wild animals start eating before you're dead. So those are my top two. After that, you know, we could discuss a lot of things. But I'm sure if you just see just the more disgusting the death, the more traumatic it's going to be for
Hmm.
people.
Because you can't help but think, what if that was me?
Mm-hmm. And now, some things that look disgusting. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen The Boys, so close your ears for a second. But the lady who pops people's heads, it looks really disgusting, but at the same time, that's a pretty good way to go because you're gone. Your consciousness is gone as soon as the pop happens. So, you know, you might have a split second of pain. That's it. But it looks disgusting, makes for good
Hmm.
TV.
Hmm.
But you know, someone who gets in an auto accident and both legs get cut off and they bleed out waiting for help, that sucks. That sucks really bad.
Oh, Mordred is the character in Shadar Logoth. Yeah, I think you were confused momentarily, but it's he shows up in his new body, and it's while Rand is fighting Samael. Um,
What? When did we talk about that?
I don't remember. I don't remember how that came up. But, um,
Did I get that wrong? I don't know what part of the conversation that was. In between Dumais Wells and talking about wolves, I'll have to re-listen to this, see what we talked about. Yeah, and this is part of the fate thing, the spoiler. Shadow Killer. Well, spoiler should have been pretty
yeah,
forward into,
this is
but
always
you know.
something that I've been mildly curious about, is wondering, is he Shadow Killer just because he killed a bunch of Trollocs uh, in the dark, like a boss,
No,
or
he
do they
they
know
had
more of
Shadow
who he
Killer
is?
in when Perrin was first learning to talk to them, and that was before he had killed the Trollocs in the
See,
dark.
I thought they gave him that name when he killed the Trollocs retrieving the horn. Is I thought when the wolves gave him that name.
It was around the same time, but I thought it was before. Now they might have attributed it to him at that time, but Shadow Killer was a thing before that.
All right, last one. Now I wouldn't go that far. Notice how frequently Jordan uses second tier characters to show us the world. Our protagonists are essentially clueless, but these other characters give us the details that make Jordan's world complete. I wouldn't say they are essentially clueless, but as we've said ad nauseum, there is a serious information gap in this world. Um, partly due to the technological limitations, but also just because the world is freaking huge and there's a lot going on.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's why the second tier characters are so important, and it's so awesome that they're written so well, is because they show us the ramifications of what the top tier characters are doing. Is okay, this is what Rand did, this is what it means. This is the impact it had. Um, and on through all of those second tier characters. But in order to be compelling, you know, it they must also be characters themselves,
Mhm.
or you're just telling instead of showing. That's how he shows us so much and does it so well, is because he's not just telling us that, and this happened over here in Ibudar. No, he's going to show us some side characters and what's happening there and their perspective. More importantly than what is happening, it is what do people think about that.
Yeah, and I think this might be. Didn't we talk about Bail Duman? And I showed the meme.
Doobie doobie doo.
Yeah, let's Bail Duman. Uh, eh, but he always ties it into the story
Mhm.
really well. It's not just Bail Duman in this place telling you something that's happening. He talks about in book 2, of course, shit went down where he was at, and he said, I'm gonna go freaking west to get
Mhm.
away from all that. And he gets to follow me, and then he
And
becomes
so that he ends up there, and
and then he gets to be he's an integral part with the girl storyline. So it's not just that he ends up in Falm to tell us what's going on. He becomes a part of the storyline.
well, and then when he comes back after such a long stretch of being gone, when he comes back in Winter's Heart, uh, I think is when he shows back up. Yeah, Winter's Heart is when he shows back up in Ibudar, and and in a very short span, because of him being back, and I'm drawing a blank on the
A
Hissy
Genin.
Shake's name. Yeah, you get caught up on what has been happening off screen in the lesser theaters of this greater war. So it's a great device, and again it works because from the beginning, Bail Doman was a fully formed and interesting character. All right, well, that is that. We should next time at least get all the way through Rand getting to Karheen and what happens there, and I can't remember what happens after that. I think it switches to Egwene, and we start to get deeper into Egwene's storyline there. So that'll be fun.
Yeah. Sorry, Scott. We'll get through it together, my friend. We'll get through it together.
But otherwise, I really like Crown of Swords because there's a lot of cool stuff that happens in this one. I think overall maybe it doesn't flow quite as well as some of our other favorites, but there are some definitely fun and interesting events that happen.
Well, to Scott's point about the pacing of Dumais Wells and how
Mhm.
so much pressure to do that again, you get kind of he keeps the dice rolling through Crown of Swords,
Mhm.
and then we get a lull after that. But yeah, he definitely keeps the dice rolling.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will see y'all then.